Welcome to Manufacturing Hub, episode 111. Today, we are going to be looking back at the month of April, and we're going to be discussing some of the conversations we had with our guests, as well as Dave's adventure in Hannover Messe that ended a week ago, which was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to discussing that, asking Dave a couple of questions. I think we'll do it interview style, where again, I ask Dave a few things. But before we get into that, I did want to recap the conversations because I think the theme was interesting. We had a lot of really good conversation with people, including even this week. So, Dave, if I can let you kick off, the first conversation we had was with Vatsal from Litmus, and they are the ones sponsoring this month. So I wanted to thank them once again. But what were your thoughts on the first conversation we had this month?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I should say I have been very lucky to have many conversations with Vatsal. So as we were getting ready to go recap this, I wanted to go back and kind of think about what we talked about.
Hmm.
On my side, one of the major things that I appreciated of having the conversation with Vatsal was kind of how open and honest he was. Of hey, I think Litmus is now like 7 years old, but in the beginning it was very much kind of an almost struggle to find product market fit. They knew that there was a reason and a need to go build what we now know as the Litmus platform, what many people are kind of building, a variety of variations and flavor of data ops platforms. But I think Watzel's kind of comment was you're going to go talk to 50 people, and 49 of those first 50 people are going to tell you, no, that's not what we want. So I find that it's very interesting. I thought that it was a really good conversation. That Vlad, did you just post your own "Hello everyone" comment from the chat onto
I did.
onto the stream?
People
Okay,
can chat
okay.
to both me and you in live, both on LinkedIn and YouTube, and ask us questions in real time.
That they can, and Vlad might even post it. He'll certainly post his responses to your comments. But no, I thought it was a really good conversation, and then I really liked the conversation talking about solutions with Vatsal on how they were allowing people to go build use cases. Now, as to if those use cases are going to be fully scalable internally to the client versus if they're going to go have a systems integrator or a solutions provider go provide those. I think that those are kind of two different questions, but being able to go have that visual interface when everyone here knows Vlad loves Node Red, right? They've got a flavor of Node Red of interface. I am a very visual person, so I appreciate basically anyone being able to go on and immediately go and play with the platform, go make proofs of concepts and everything along those lines. What were your big takeaways, Vlad?
Yeah, I mean, I like the conversation we had with him, especially that he's been working on the startup for a while now. I think he discussed a couple of projects, how they went. So I certainly appreciate those stories. And I think, as you mentioned, the fact that he was fairly candid that they didn't have everything figured out. I think that in many instances with startups, you sort of see the end result. But he was willing to talk to us that it was very challenging at the beginning, right? And I think we've talked about this a number of times that in the industrial space, there's so many different protocols, right? And I remember the comment that he made is that when people would ask them, "Are you compatible with this protocol?" they would pretty much have to say yes to everything, and then they would have to scramble to develop, that interface as soon as possible because I guess that's just the reality of our industry. And I think that anyone who is either building hardware or software needs to be aware of that reality. I guess if I want to put it that way. But in any case, I think it was a good conversation. I personally would still like to see a bit of a demo for Litmus. I think I have a really clear idea based on that conversation what the platform has to offer. But I do hope that we get Vatsal back on the show at some point in time where he can maybe walk us through, maybe do a live build, and I think that would be interesting for me to see, especially as like I've worked on some data solutions that were a little bit more, I want to say like closed, how to say like closed and custom in nature. So I like the fact that and he mentioned this on the conversation that you can pretty much sign up to Litmus and you are able to deploy this internally by yourself, or you could reach out to them, to work on the solution. So I think that that is certainly something that we're seeing more and more of in the industrial space, but I don't think enough of. Those would be kind
Absolutely.
of my comments.
I will say, Vlad, after having seen 5 or 6 days worth of demos and doing live builds with them, you would absolutely love. You would absolutely love the platform. And you'd just go down a rabbit hole, and we'd miss 12 shows because you're just going and playing on the platform and not talking to the people here. But no, again, thank you to Votesol for coming on and chatting. We will absolutely have to continue the conversation at some point in the near future. Beyond that, next we move to Kevin. What were your thoughts on Kevin coming from the hyperscaler background? Yeah, what were your thoughts on Kevin and the conversation we had with him?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting. I think that our focus in that conversation was very centric on AI and machine learning. I certainly understood very quickly that Kevin knows what he's talking about. We talked about architecture, we talked about potential solutions, we talked about, how the projects are actually executed in real life. So I think that it brought a different perspective, which was, I want to say, like I said, on one side, it was very sort of, we can find these solutions that we have not necessarily always like defined through AI and ML, but he was also very pragmatic about it, right? Like he talked a lot
Mhm.
about how we need to take one step at a time. We really need to get contextualized data. I think he made a lot of points about the necessity of how to say it, like getting your infrastructure right before you can apply AI and ML. But he gave a few examples as well of projects that I thought were really interesting. So I certainly appreciate his expertise. I really hope he finds something, a really good opportunity after Google. So I think he's probably going to announce it like any time now. And I think he mentioned he had some very solid leads. So it's going to be really interesting what he does in our space. What were your
Absolutely.
thoughts?
I enjoyed having the conversation with Kevin. I am almost willing to go call him a reformed hyperscaler, but we will have to go see where Kevin does move to. Where Kevin does move to next. But I thought it's really interesting, right? And I think that if we can take a half a step back and just kind of have a larger hyperscaler conversation, right? Up until, I don't know, January-ish, when we had like large layoffs from the Microsoft, from the Google, from the AWS, I think to some point AWS side, it was a hey, hyperscalers are all about how can we get more data pushed up through the pipeline into the cloud, because more data equals more money, and more money equals job security and all of those other things. I think we are almost seeing maybe a bit of a step back, because hyperscalers have probably come to the realization that we're not going to just be able to go push all of our data up directly to the cloud. As much as Vlad would like to do control in the cloud, it causes issues, right? And it may be more than just 40 or 50 or $100,000 a month in services and internet bill issues, but it's going to cause issues with latency and everything else. So I, especially while I was at Hanover, saw a bit of a step back off of what I've kind of seen online, basically saying, hey, there are absolutely good reasons to go leverage uh, cloud services, to go leverage hyperscaler services. But first, we need to do a little bit of contextualization. We need to have a better idea and understanding of what and why we are sending the data to the cloud. Now, it could be the fact that I had a litmus badge around my neck the whole week, Vlad, which is why everyone was gushing about how well Litmus does this. Or it could be that a lot of people have learned a lot of difficult and hard and expensive lessons as to the best direction and the best way to go ahead and push everything to the cloud. But I think we'll see a lot of cloud and edge combination services, whether it being with Litmus and a hyperscaler, whether it being with someone else and a private cloud. I think that there are a bunch of different opportunities when it comes to both of. I think that there are a bunch of different opportunities when it comes to both of those. While at Hanover, I and Dave on the Litmus side had a conversation with Simon Floyd, who is the director of manufacturing and transportation period for Google, right? So we were up there, we were having a conversation. We did a talk, and it basically included, hey, we need some sort of edge as well as cloud architecture in order to best help manufacturers and best build the architecture for the future.
Yeah, and I would say, like my comment to that is the architecture is complex, right? And I think we've covered it multiple times on the channel, but there's a lot of nuances I think that you realize which make it so that you need both cloud as well as edge, but in different, I want to say like application layers, right? And so what Kevin had brought up, which again, I think me and you have debated this off stream a couple of times, but it's the amount of data that you want to be collecting, processing, making maybe even like decisions on. And I think that, maybe I want to throw this question to our audience. So if you're watching us live, I'm curious to know, how your facility or how your company is approaching collecting data from the plant floor. And if you're listening to us in podcast form a week from now, hopefully then, write us a note. I think that we also had a very interesting conversation with Regia this week that kind of, I want to say, intertwined into this topic. But ultimately, I think that more and more factories will collect more and more data. The fact that they, structure it and kind of pinpoint accurately what they want to apply is debatable. But I think everyone's gonna have almost like their own take, right? Like as we talked about it, it's kind of like a spectrum. You either want to narrow down on the specific use case and you only collect that, or you use the water hose approach, which is like collect everything and then sort of figure out what you what you can use. So, like I said, I'd be curious to hear from our audience, maybe if there's some comments from people that are approaching manufacturing data. But yeah, to get back to like maybe your point, I think we will always need some sort of a device on the edge, and like there's a lot of, I think, like understanding that falls into that, because it can be a PC, it can be a PLC, it could be an IPC, right? So there's different flavors of what that truly means. But I think that for me, if we want to get into a little bit of a definition, Dave, it is something that processes the data before it's sent up, right? So you're not just connecting to a bunch of different devices directly from the cloud. You're able to create buffers, and I think we talked again, like with Regia, a little bit about this. But again, the point I'm going to make is it's interesting to see how the industry is going to progress, right? Whether it is going to be more on the cloud side or more on the edge side. I think there's also, and we've explored this many times, the question of cybersecurity. So if I'm air gap, then I'm not connecting to the cloud at all. If I'm how to say it, if I'm fearing for cybersecurity, right, or if I have more fear of the data leaking out, then I'm going to be using more edge. But in any case, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens next.
I would agree with that. I'm going to go throw up Hank's comment here because every time Vlad goes talk about saying how he wants to collect every piece of data, Hank's answer is kind of also my answer. And Hank says that he's been to plants where the answer is collecting data, question mark, question mark, question mark, right? I think that as awesome as it is to be able to go talk about how we go and deliver solutions and varying types of edge versus edge and cloud, or just directly to cloud, or kind of any of these, there is still a not insignificant portion of groups who are doing a poor job, or are not collecting data, or if we are collecting data, we are collecting data we're collecting data by hand, and maybe not we're doing anything with it. So I would say that certainly collecting data on my side is just the first step, right? We could go and put down, I don't know, half a dozen architectures, or a dozen, 500 architectures fairly simply. And if we're not going to go leverage what that looks like into making into going driving results, right? Which is basically the theme that we were talking about here. It becomes why are we going through and doing this?
Mhm.
So Vlad threw up a comment from Hellman saying that I work in the aerospace industry. We are in the process of digitizing all the machinery data and bring the data from OT to IT. We're planning to use OPCUA and some companion specifications. I think it's ultimately, is it safe to use OPCUA to write data controls to the OT network, or should I use OPCUA just for reading data? Um, that's a good question. I guess let me touch upon protocols because we've talked a bunch about protocols. I think OPUCUA is a great protocol. We've certainly talked a bunch about OPCUA. We've certainly talked a bunch about MQTT, especially Sparkplug B on this show. I think OPCUA is a great protocol if you guys already have OPCUA servers. If you already know how to use OPCUA to go make those connections, I think that is perfectly fine. As to is it safe to use OPCUA to write data controls onto the OT network? That's kind of a different question. That goes back to kind of what does the cybersecurity look like? What are you looking to go write? Is it like actually to the controls, or are you just looking to go push it back and forth and have kind of like a two-way channel onto the networks? And I every time I don't give a good answer, I feel like the consultant over here, Vlad.
Mhm.
But I feel like that's very much going to be kind of application specific, and understanding what you guys are looking to do and understanding kind of the direction that you guys want to go as a company. And I think a lot of that is probably on the cybersecurity side, more than anything else, right? Like, are we putting a one-way data diode out? If we're having two-way communication via that OPCUA server and it's on the IT network, are we worried about cybersecurity, and maybe should we be worried about cybersecurity? So I think all of those are good questions, but that's very much kind of probably a much higher level question of what does risk and risk tolerance and what does risk mitigation look like on the particular application. Vlad, do you have any other thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I guess like for me, safety also involves sort of like the personnel safety, right, or physical safety that is tied to the process, and then safety. You could also ask that maybe is it safe for the product, right? So I've certainly done a lot of food and beverage projects, and so safety could also involve like quality of the product. But I guess again, without knowing too many details, I think that from a protocol standpoint, you can certainly transmit that data, right? But I think from cybersecurity standpoint, as you've mentioned, it will be kind of like a to be determined. What are you actually sending, and what are you actually affecting? And then from a physical safety, again, in my experience, you should be limiting the writing of variables that could affect anything that might be dangerous, right? So, for example, I would not necessarily write data to like a robotic cell or something that might affect the functionality of a process that might be how to. And again, like I don't want to get into a lot of the details on safety, but you can certainly do a lot of quote unquote questionable things by sending data from the IT side that could be vulnerable to an attack, or it could simply miscalculate something and then affect your process and or the safety of the personnel. So I think if the question is purely from a protocol standpoint, I think the protocol is fine. You'll be able to send the data, but in other areas, you would need to conduct a risk analysis, as Dave suggested. But maybe if we go back to Hank's point, right, like collecting data, I've certainly spoke to a lot of engineers that come to me with the same question, and a lot of times, at least in my experience, this would be on the proof of concept side, right? So a engineering manager or process manager, operations manager will come to the engineering or maintenance team and ask them like, "Hey, can we collect and trend some of the data of our process?" And this could be some temperatures, this could be calculating, how many boxes have we produced, and a plan that's not extremely how to say, like automated. You would have like one of those proxies at the end of the line, and they would just throw this up on like a
Mhm.
display, let's say, or they have a status of the line. So the engineers are asking, well, how can we collect something as simple as that and just as proof of concept display it? And I think that the immediate value, again, the first proof of concept, right, before you're committing any money to a full plant rollout, if you can just collect that data into like a Raspberry Pi, IPC, PLC, there's a few like very cheap solutions that you can use just to demonstrate, hey, you can literally save that data and trend it on something that is like a phone or a computer that doesn't require an engineering workstation, right? Because I think me and you, Dave, we can connect to the PLC over like the Rockwell solution or the Siemens solution, and I can trend, I can see whatever I need, and usually the engineers can do that, but that data is then not available to the ops manager who needs to make a decision what's based on what's happening on their shift. So I think there's a lot of proof of concept solutions that can be done very cheaply. So I really, to Hank's point, I don't understand when plants ask me like collecting data question mark. It just means that they have a lack of personnel that's willing to figure this out, or they just have like zero budget, or they just don't understand maybe the value of collecting some of that data. But I think as what are your
Well, I,
thoughts,
I
Dave?
I guess I want to dig into that point a little bit, right? So we were
Sure.
talking on the Kevin side about the hyperscaler. I think
Yep.
to that point, it is like the exact opposite, right? So most of the plants, most of the groups that I talk to that aren't collecting data are generally groups that have engineering maintenance teams that have been at that facility their entire career, right? So they come in, they learn what has worked at the facility for the last 20 or 50 or 100 years, and that is what they know. And if they don't go and learn new tools, if they are not out in the depths of the internet, going and arguing about different ways to graphically and visually represent things, right? If we're not in the process of doing this, and all you know is that one facility, and we don't hire mid and experienced engineers because our company's goal is to hire juniors and run them up the ranks, then you're never going to have that outside knowledge, right? And it may at that point be, we do need to collect data, right? Everyone is talking about collecting data. Maybe corporate is demanding we do some sort of digital transformation, we do some sort of industry 4.0 solution, but we don't know how to do it. So I think that I see a number of groups, I see a number of large groups, and I've had this conversation with a number of large groups who you wouldn't think would have this problem, kind of go and have this problem. And so I think that's kind of the exact opposite of the hyperscaler conversation of, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And coming from our perspective, I think it is very much, I think it is very much an issue of, if you don't know what you don't know, you don't know the right questions to ask. And if you don't bring the right people in to help show and guide where they need to be, you just may never get there. We've actually got a comment from Hank in here, saying that he asked a plant, how much does an hour of downtime cost in a certain line, and they had no idea. And it makes it tough to justify process improvements if they don't know what the savings are going to be. And I agree with that. I have certainly worked with plants that, like, it's a, sometimes we know what downtime is going to look like. Sometimes we know what scrap is going to look like really well. Other times it's they just kind of shrug your shoulders. So you got to do a bit of a back of the napkin. Hey, this is what we in theory do over the course of the year. This is how long we run. This is kind of what costs look like to get some sort of round, number as to what downtime looks like. Hopefully, in that instance, Hank, they've got an idea of what the revenue of the facility looks like, and how many hours in theory they run over the course of the year in order to in order to move forward with that. And then Brian is in the comments saying, return on investment, need the return on investment. How do you launch without it? I think that is, I think all of those are really good points. But I also think many times people are like, hey, we need to go solve this spot problem. And yeah, I think many times people are like, hey, we need to go solve this spot problem. This is how to go solve the spot problem.
Yeah. I mean, look, Dave, I will make the comment that I think what's going to happen in reality is the companies that will optimize their cost of product out the door, right? The average, again, we can get into the calculation, but every plant is most likely, or from my experience, calculates what does it cost them to make a bottle of whatever, right? It could be like ketchup, it could be a package of something, it could be a pallet. And so the plants that will optimize that cost
Hmm.
will most likely purchase or buy out the plants that cannot optimize it, right? And what I mean by that is like from like a pure business perspective, I think that they will just push out plants that have absolutely no idea of what's going on in their operations out of the market. And I think like we see this all the time. There's a lot of consolidation happening, even in the large companies, right? I think the example that I can use is Yoplait had a plant uh, back in, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 2012 that was running very poorly, and they essentially closed down the facility. And that's when the current CEO, I guess, and owner of Chobani came in, bought the plant for like pennies on the dollar, right? They essentially like abandoned the plant. He got all of that equipment literally for scrap metal price,
Hmm.
and he started up now like a multi-billion-dollar company because again they are very and it's not, again, I'm not going to paint a picture that it was only solely based on data, right?
Yep.
Like that, don't get me wrong, like there's also like a product, there's marketing, there's a lot of other, I want to say, like extrinsic factors that play into this, but ultimately they are very data driven, they understand the process. And so if you have teams that are too relaxed, I almost tend to say that it's almost, it goes against the engineering approach, right? Like as an engineer, you should be learning new technologies, you should be
Hmm.
always looking at ways to do new things. And I don't think it's an excuse to say, well, we've hired somebody 20 years ago, so they're going to absolutely never do anything outside of, what the factory has been doing. So I understand that that's what happens and that's the reality. But I think that if I was in a management role at that facility, even if I'm not, let's say, highly technical, I could sort of see what's happening outside of my horizon, because that's what a leader is paid to do, also. And I would try and instill a culture that is, to some extent, trying new things, right? And I'm not trying to sell this as every Industry 4.0, IIoT, digital transformation initiative is going to be highly successful and propel you to the stratosphere. But what I'm trying to say is that you should be experimenting. You should be, again, there's a lot of low hanging fruit, and we've talked about this. And there's a lot of facilities implementing OEE metrics. They're implementing condition monitoring. They're implementing, fault finding tools. So there's a lot of things that you should be at least looking at. And if you're not, I really think you're just going to be bought out at some point by a company that has better technology. And one last thing, like I'll mention, and I think I've talked about this on stream. Again, I went to this co-packer of beer here locally about now maybe like 6 months to a year ago,
Hmm.
and they had like fully like digitally integrated systems where you could place an order through their website. It will be scheduled down to the production line. It would be prioritized, based on the quantity of product, based on OEE. So it's like fully integrated, right? Like, and
Hmm.
I've not seen any of this from large co-packers. So at some point, if the small company can make innovations like that and they capture some of the market because of how easy it is for the customer, right? Like the focus is on the customer, for the customer to place orders with them, they will just scale and then purchase the companies that cannot adopt such technology. So I think it's always thinking, what are we providing that's better for the end customer?
And
Uh,
I like that, Vlad. And I always love your just sheer optimism about all of these topics. Every time we talk about it, I just love your sheer optimism. I look forward to the point in Manufacturing Hub when you're an operations manager and you come on and you complain about X, Y, and Z things happening and be like, Vlad, where's the extra 20 hours that you have over the course of your week to go figure out these new technologies or something along those lines? But no, I agree with you. I think that we will certainly find a lot of haves and have nots as we move forward. Again, I think that there are some organizations so large that they continue to be large because they are just large. And it is difficult to fail sometimes when you are as large as some of these major organizations. Uh, but,
sure.
but yeah, absolutely. Beyond that, I think that we will certainly see the need for data and data collection and understanding what that means. And I think that we will see some groups succeed and some groups fail based upon kind of everything that we have discussed here. Let's go ahead. Let me give kind of a quick recap of Tomi. So Tomi and I had a conversation at Hanover. If anyone has been looking for the podcast, I had to go get the backup of the audio recording because I think there was a restream or audio issue on the restream. So I'm in the process of working on that. It will go up at some point either later today or over the weekend, so you guys can go ahead and check on that. But I'm excited that I was able to grab the audio. Tomi has this really interesting background, right? So right now he works for Nokia. He is on the product side. I don't know if he is head of product for like connected. We would almost call it like connected enterprise, leveraging a lot of very similar to the Litmus platform that we had talked about. But he is from Finland. I think he listens to the show. He says sometimes he goes for walks and listens to the show. So if you're listening to this, Tomi, thank you again for coming and chatting. His background is he worked in oil refineries, right? And for those guys, an extra 2 to 5% is huge on the profitability side. So he spent a number of years running and building kind of this bespoke solution, as I would call it, in order to go collect everything and analyze the data and then get to the point of leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning. And somewhere along the way, he transitioned over to Nokia, where he is trying to go build that in a scalable way. And for me, that was a lot of conversations that I had at Hanover, right? Is, hey, we built a solution, and the solution that we built worked really well, but as I try to go move it to the second line or the 20th line or the third or the fourth or the fifth facility, it becomes really difficult to go take my bespoke solution, maybe because we did not build it in a way that was easily scalable. And so I think that we are seeing a lot of groups looking both how do we build the solution better because we've already made this mistake. But I think we also see a lot of groups who have maybe learned those lessons through other companies and other organizations saying, hey, we had X, Y, and Z struggles. What is the best way to go about not running into that issue with this next company and this next organization?
All right. What are your thoughts on the conversation we had with Rija this week, Dave?
Mm-hmm. I thought it was really interesting, right? Like I think that kind of very much dovetailed into the conversations that I just kind of discussed that we were having at Hanover, right? And I think it's interesting, right? So we talked to a lot of, especially before this, a lot of people who are building kind of a solution. And I will have to go look it up, but we had Joseph Davalio on maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe 8 weeks ago. He was talking a bit about hyperconvergence. He was talking a bit about Hyperscaler. He was talking about putting solutions into the cloud and leveraging the cloud for that scalability. And I don't know if I'm hearing it more and more after that, or if it's I'm having more and more of those conversations of, hey, how do we go about the process of actually scaling this? And so on my side, I'm hearing more of those conversations. I'm hearing hey, we need to go down the path of collecting data, and maybe we did a proof of concept, but looking at this proof of concept, I can see that this is obviously like this isn't going to scale to the next 3 to 5 facilities. So how do we go build this in a way that does scale to the next 3 to 5 facilities? Because we have done enough to kind of wet our whistle, if you will, but we haven't done enough to go build it in a scalable solution. So, and to pull it back to Rija, I thought it was a great conversation. I thought that it was very interesting. And I think that his kind of pain points are even more extrapolated because he was talking about 2, 3, 4 different continents that they had facilities and were trying to go roll out solutions to those facilities. And I really appreciated his comments of, hey, we went to go attempt to build an MES. COVID happened. We lost the budget to MES, but we still had this team. So our conversations were, how can we go deploy and deliver value without having this much larger, much more expensive, much more bespoke MES structure.
Yeah, and I would say that like one comment that I made, which maybe goes back to my previous comment on data, was the fact that they are testing solutions, right? Like even though they
Hmm.
are a very small company in all things considered, right? They have 8 plants, so they're not, the large like Procter and Gamble's or Fords of the world or whatever have you. Like they are still investing resources in having an internal, right? So this is not even some like consulting service that they're paying for, but they have an internal center where they're testing these different solutions and they're figuring out what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what is like an
Hmm.
important factor. And if you're curious, about that conversation, he listed a lot of different sort of metrics that they use internally to understand what would work for them. And I think the comment he made is that if you're looking to, for example, to collect data, or you're looking at any other industry 4.0 or IoT, whatever you call it, solution, you should first figure out what makes sense and what is the important factors for you, right? So I think that he made that comment, and I think the fact that they're doing that internally
Hmm.
is extremely important. And I think that,
Absolutely.
again, to go back to like Hank's point, I think if there's a facility that just says pure like question marks, maybe they should reconsider the strategy. And look, I understand the comments of, there might not be enough like time for somebody to look into. Well, maybe there's like a personnel issue. Maybe we need to hire more people to figure this out, or hire somebody like Regia to be sort of leading this change. And we talked about that a little bit too, right? He made some comments about generalist versus specialist. So maybe there's just not a person that can dedicate the time to research what those solutions look like and properly bring them in, right? Like I'm how to say it, like I made the comment of maybe they're not getting the data because of technical reasons, but maybe there's just not the right person in place. So in any case, my comments, and maybe to close off on that conversation with Regia, was that I really like the fact that they're still a relatively small company that is investing in
Hmm.
people that can look at those solutions, and they have the systems in place to audit, but also test different applications, understand what value they bring to the organization, and then, as he had described, like a couple of projects, deploy them to facilities on the plant floor
Hmm.
at the operator level, right? That they're not imposing the solutions, but they really understand the needs and deploy them to the right people. I think that was extremely well explained by him in that episode.
I would agree with that. I am sure that you loved his comments upon kind of the internal testing
Hmm.
lab that they had. I guess I want to have a bit of a conversation on that. I
Hmm.
guess in your opinion, Vlad, do you think that more people need to go spend the time and the money testing internally, or do you think that there are enough kind of known architectures and solutions that the majority of groups can go pick one of those and then find solutions partners in order to go help deploy what that looks like?
I think that you should certainly invest capital in testing internally, right? So I even made the
Hmm.
comment, I think, during that conversation, that I think that in the current landscape of different solutions, there is a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of different players, and the reality isn't that they're necessarily building bad solutions, but it's more, I think that there's solutions that are more suitable for different verticals, right? And they meet certain very specific needs. And I think without testing yourself, it becomes difficult to truly understand the value that that specific solution will bring for you. And I think that the trap that many, or at least some companies that I've spoken to, fall into is that they rely on a third party that then still has a learning curve of your facility, apply that solution. So I think that at the end, what happens is that the fit of the solution is not ideal, right? And obviously, we can discuss like how ideal it needs to be. But I think that there were better solutions if you were to test and go through that process before you sort of confirm what you're going to be doing. So, I guess to answer your question, I think that you should be investing money and time in validating the solutions that you pick. And it could be through the third party, right? Like the third party could bring like, here are the top 3 solutions. Let's test them internally, understand like what the nuances are, and then we're going to go and deploy. But I think skipping that step, which again I've seen a lot in the industry, is detrimental. And I will make the last comment on that is a lot of the third parties are also incentivized, to bring a certain solution to light. So it's also important to work with people who can be a bit impartial on those
Mhm.
solutions.
Absolutely. I think that understanding why you are going to use whatever solution it is that you're going to use and having at least some amount of internal knowledge is good. There are some groups, it's not Vlad, it's not myself, but there are some groups who make their money off of embedding lots of resources and going and building a solution and then having 1, 2, 5, 10 people just go live on site to go run those solutions for the next 2 decades.
Yep.
Again, not our businesses. Many people have been very successful with it. It is not how either of us have opted to spend our lives, and it's not saying that there's necessarily anything wrong with it. But as Vlad has said, and I think as we talked with Regia a bit about vendor lock-in, right?
Mhm.
Like no one particularly likes vendor lock-in and code that you can't get to. So, no one likes vendor lock-in and code that you can't get to. But when we look at that, it should also be the same with control systems, right? Like we should have people on site, or we should have a path to go train and bring those people up to speed on how to go run systems. And there are a number of groups out there who will help you go ahead and do that. Let's transition slightly over to Hanover.
Mhm.
Vlad, I'll let you go ahead and ask me some questions.
Well, it
I
looks
got a
like the
comment
first
on here.
question came in for you. What new
I was
info
I
did
was
you
gonna
learn about
say,
IO Link, Dave, at Hanover?
yes. So I had Rich. Um, I had Rich up here, Rich McDonald. Rich, thank you for asking the question. I guess from my side, IO-Link isn't anything particularly new for me. I've spent a bunch of years working with the Banner and the Turk and the IFMs of the world. So for me, IO-Link is a fairly normal, fairly common thing. I'm a big fan of IO-Link. It is about as close to plug and play as we can possibly get. So I'm a big fan of IO-Link. I did see some IO-Link safety come up. I think I saw wire. I don't know if they were wireless or wired e-stops up in pictures, and so I thought that those were interesting. I have not done any work with IO-Link safety in the past. But again, I consider IO-Link as like the most basic level of communications protocol. And if we're going to look at IO-Link as the most basic communications level of protocol for an Industry 4.0 or digital transformation, I'm happy to go ahead and call it that. I think that we need, well, I guess I didn't realize until maybe this podcast when Vlad maybe learned about IO-Link, or someone learned about IO-Link as we were having a conversation here. So I'm a big fan of IO-Link in general. Um, a couple of other note kind of high level notes that I will make on Hanover, and then I'll let Vlad ask me some questions. One, holy crap, it's big. Right. So I had been told that it is large, right? I've been told that when we fill all of the halls, it's like 4 times the size of McCormick Center in Chicago. Um, it is big. Yeah, it is big. I did not make it everywhere. There were a couple of times where my Apple Watch is like, Dave, are you in a workout? And I'm just like trying to walk fairly quickly from one hall to the next because they're like, I don't know, a quarter of a mile or half a mile away. And so it was a lot of fun. I got to go hang out with some folks from Siemens. I got to go hang out with some folks from Phoenix Contact. And for me, it was a lot of fun, right? So I've been to Automation Fair a couple of times. I really liked it because I got to see most of the Siemens ecosystem. I got to see most of the Phoenix Contact ecosystem in one place. I took a step back at one point to go take a picture of the Phoenix Contact booth to send to Zach Stank, big fan of the show. We will see him at Automate. And I'm like, Zach, I don't know how you're going to fit this like 200 by 200 or 100 by 100 foot booth into the Automate booth, but I am very excited for it. And then Siemens was like an entire town by itself. It had like a couple of different sections, had this cafe, it had this speaker section, and it was like dead silent comparative to everything else. Saw a lot of vertical farming, which was very interesting. As I described to all of the as I described to all of the Europeans, I love the concept. I love the concept of hyper local. It is not a big American or North American concept, but I'm hopeful we'll see more of it. And then I think I made that comment online, and I had a couple of people comment as to vertical farming initiatives that they have done. So perhaps in the future, we'll go spend some time at a vertical farming initiative. I don't know how we would capture video of that. I would just spend the entire time with my neck pointed upward looking, but that would be a lot of fun. Let's see, what else did I see? I saw a bunch of comments and talking about single pair Ethernet, SPE. So again, meters over to feet have confused and rattled my brain a little bit, but I think current Ethernet is, you can get like 200 feet of run or something along those lines. With single pair Ethernet, you can connect basically as many sensors as you want, and you can run up to 1,000 meters in one stretch, which is really interesting. I saw Phoenix talk about it. I saw a couple of other groups talk about single pair Ethernet as well. Saw a lot of DC to DC and other electric vehicle charging, which I thought was very interesting. And then it gets to the standardization that Europe has with chargers and the lack of standardization that North America has with chargers, which is, it kind of is what it is. But no, it was amazing. I really enjoyed seeing a lot of the ecosystems. And then I was right next to the Google booth with Litmus. Litmus are Google partners. So I was right next to the Google booth, and then I knew a bunch of people in the Microsoft booth. I saw the Tulip folks in the Microsoft booth. I saw the inductive automation folks, and I saw the HiByte folks in the AWS booth. Sorry, I'm trying to remember which booth is which. And as I said, kind of towards the beginning, you can see that the hyperscalers are not dead, right? They may be re-strategizing the direction that they're going to go to continue to hit on manufacturing, but the digital services are absolutely not dead.
Were there any like interesting like tech unveilings? I know you mentioned the single pair Ethernet cables, but I think like
Yep.
Litmus had a new service that they announced. I believe that Siemens has like their new like virtual controller they announced. Like anything else that like maybe stands out, or like I'm curious if you have like memories of something really big being announced or unveiled at the show.
Yeah, so when I was there, Litmus announced either right before or during a major partnership with Nokia, which I can say now. I thought it was out in the open before I went, but we got to spend a bunch of times with the folks at Nokia. Siemens was continuing to talk about and unveil their. Oh, Bernd is going to kill me because I'm going to get it wrong again. I believe it's their virtual PLC,
Yeah.
which is similar in concept to a soft PLC. But so Bernd Reithal, he was on the show a month or 6 weeks ago. We will see him at Automate. We'll talk more about this at Automate. His comment was basically, as opposed to going and making major changes to IDEs or the TIA portal for future PLCs, they're going to basically standardize on one this virtual PLC style software, and then all of the IPCs, all of the S7 1500s, kind of everything that gets rolled out into the future. Hardware may change, but they're going to standardize on this as the software platform to go ahead and make it easier. So in theory, Vlad could go program something on a virtual PLC on his computer. He could go test it out, and then he could go flip the code into an S7 1500, into an IPC, into something along those lines. And it should be a seamless transition, right? So I thought that was very interesting. I did not sit through a bunch of other kind of major announcements, mostly because if there were other major announcements, I didn't hear about them. Again, like you get off the train and you wait in like a 5 to 7 minute line in order to just with the exhibitor pass on the fast lane to go ahead and get in. And then it's like a 4 or 5 minute walk to the set of halls that you're in. And then it is just so much. Um, it is just so much. I know that there were a number of announcements. So as I understand it, Hanover is a place that many people go make their announcements every year as to what is going on. So I'm sure there were other announcements. I maybe not did not catch all of them. I did not get to go sit through kind of major unveilings or anything like that. I know about 10 years ago they did a major unveiling of the S7 1500. Now 10 years later, their Siemens major unveiling was the virtual PLC. Again, I know single pair Ethernet was big. Oh, nope, I was Phoenix Contact unveiled some sort of new like box style PC. That we will have some more content coming out. We'll have some more content coming out about, but a bunch of really interesting things. In fact, there were so many interesting things. It felt like it was almost a detractor from like major advances. Again, single pair Ethernet, 1,000 meter runs of cabling. Kind of took the back seat to a bunch of other things that we were talking about, but that's because there's just so much.
Interesting. What was the audience like at Hanover? Was it geared towards like engineers? Was there a lot of maybe decision makers, a lot of people in sales, marketing? Like, what was your pulse maybe on who visits Hanover if it is different than a feel from a convention in US?
So I think most people visit Hanover, especially in Europe and Asia. I feel like it is the place to go. I had many conversations with people as to what is the comparison, what is the Hanover version, uh, what is Hanover in North America, the United States, and after having been there, I can tell you, Vlad, there is literally nothing in comparison that we have in North America. There was talks about like when IMTS and Hanover USA get together every other year, but it's still like maybe a quarter of the size. So I would say that I had conversations, lots of decision makers, lots of engineers, lots of senior engineers. I had people interested in specific types of applications. I had people going, especially folks that know us from the show, going. We were opening laptops. We were talking about architecture. And then on the other side, we had like Friday is basically like the day that the local school children get to come through. So
Gotcha.
on Friday, it was like that. I thought that it was fairly busy. I think the number I heard was approximately 70,000 people came through, which I thought was good traffic. I would also tell you that that is down from like the high peaks of like 250,000. But at 250,000, that's like shoulder to shoulder in the aisle. No one can have a conversation. So I thought it was good traffic. I thought that there were a bunch of people who were interested in having valid conversations about a bunch of things. We probably had, I don't know, maybe a couple of dozen people come up to say hi because they know us from the show, many of whom I did not know before that. So all of that was really awesome. And it was great to hear how most people are having similar conversations, similar difficulties kind of across the globe as what we're talking on here.
Awesome. I really hope that we have the opportunity to go back maybe as the manufacturing hub duo next year. So if there's any interest in the current viewers slash listeners to have us at their booth, certainly reach out to us. But I do want to point out before we wrap things up, in this stream that me and Dave are both going to be at Automate 2023, and we will be at hopefully several booths, but we will certainly be doing rounds. We will be walking around the show and shaking hands, but also reviewing some of the technological advancements and looking at different new things in automation. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and that's going to be May 22nd to the 25th in Detroit, Michigan. So if you are listening to us live on LinkedIn, YouTube, if you're listening to this podcast when it is released, there is certainly still time to purchase your tickets to attend the show. and to come see us live in person at I don't want to say the largest automation show in North America, but I think it was certainly extremely popular last year. I've seen a lot of videos, and I think like me and you were thinking about going, but last minute MIA got canceled, so we sort of shuffled around our plans and didn't make it. But I am certainly looking forward to being at Automate this year, and I think Hank Priam is putting a smiley face. He's gonna be there, and it's gonna be
Yep.
really cool. What are your thoughts, Dave?
I'm looking forward to Automate. Automate last year, I was somewhere in the wilds of Canada as I was heading to Alaska,
Yep.
and so this year I had the week blocked out to make sure that I wasn't in the middle of the forest somewhere to go. I'm looking to go. I always think of Automate as the big robotic show, right? So I will expect lots of robotic arms. I'll expect lots of robotic arms. I'll expect kind of lots of interesting conversations that we get to have. And so I'm looking forward to it. Stay tuned to this channel, Manufacturing Hub, Vlad and myself, as we go and talk a little bit more about what we're planning to do. I hope in the next week or so we will confirm kind of dates and times of exactly where we will be. If y'all would like to come hang out with us in a variety of booths in person. But I do know that we've got a time limit on this, and we need to say goodbye. Vlad, do you want to go close us out, or you want me to ask people to like, subscribe, and say goodbye?
No, I can get it done, Dave. So everyone, thank you so much for listening live and or in podcast form. If you've made it this far, please make sure to leave us a comment, subscribe to our channels, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, as well as any other podcast channels that you're listening to this on. Highly appreciate your reviews. Those are always welcome, especially by the algorithms, but also us. I think we certainly appreciate people letting us know what they like about the show and maybe what changes they would like to see. So make sure to leave us a comment, make sure to leave us a positive review, and let us know. And that being said, we will see you next month where we are kicking off a new theme, and that's going to be efficient engineering, sponsored by Siemens. It's going to be a lot of very good conversations. And thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. See everyone